How are you? And welcome to another video from The Open Author. My name is David B. Lyons, and today we're going to be discussing how you can improve the dialogue in your fiction writing. So this is easier than you think. I only have two main tips that I've been teaching for about 10 or 11 years that instantly help students improve their dialogue. So why don't we get straight down to it? Okay, so as I mentioned, there's only really two tips that I would like you to bear in mind when you're writing dialogue, and I promise that if you apply these rules to your everyday writing, particularly when it comes to your dialogue, obviously, it will really make your dialogue pop and come alive and be more authentic to each of your characters. So how do you improve your dialogue? Well, tip number one is your dialogue should always be aiming to carry the plot forward. There's only two reasons you should use dialogue. One is to carry plot forward, and the other is perhaps to give insight into your character. But most of the time, in fact, the ratio I give my students is about 90% of the time, your dialogue should be carrying plot forward. So what do I mean by that? Well, I'll show you extracts from a short story that I was working on with my students. Now, this is a story I was working on with young students, and it's a story about a young girl who has an excessive brain. She's so much more intelligent than everybody else that the British Prime Minister invites her into 10 Downing Street to help her put a stop to a war that the Russian president is trying to start. Now this extract, I'm going to give you two examples of it, is the first meeting of that young girl with the British Prime Minister. So let's read extract one. Her hand was shaking as she walked up to the door. It looked just like it did on the television. Tall, black, a big shiny number 10 in the middle of it. She knocked lightly and a balding man opened the door. Prime Minister, he said. Tina Gates is here. Tina smiled and looked at the Prime Minister. Hello, Tina, the Prime Minister called out. She walked over and shook Tina's hand. Very pleased to meet you. Pleased to meet you too, said Tina. Would you like a cup of tea or a water, anything like that? Do you have a squash, Prime Minister? Oh, I don't know. I'll ask Charles the butler. Charles? Charles? The Prime Minister called out. Now that's just extract one, or sample one of the same bullet point, the same plot point within that story. But let's have a look at extract two, another way that I could approach that. Tina had felt quite nervous during the Rolls-Royce chauffeured car journey down to London, her heart rate racing even more as she pulled out onto the famous street. But her nervousness didn't last very long. Within 5 minutes of meeting the Prime Minister, Tina got straight down to business. So you called me here to see if I would speak to the Russian president, she asked, her brow creasing. The Prime Minister pursed her lips, rested her cup of tea on the side table. I'm afraid you may be our only hope, Tina. Igor Stalanovich is intent on beginning a massive war through Middle Europe. He has positioned over 1 million troops through the most vulnerable countries on the continent. Tina swallowed hard. She stuttered, I'll do it. Of course I'll do it. But why do you think I can convince him to change his mind? Now, there are two approaches to the same plot point, Tina meeting the Prime Minister for the first time. Now, what tends to happen when people meet for the first time is we use what I call niceties. Hi, how are you? Pleased to meet you. Please come in. Would you like a drink? Now, all of these niceties that you can see in extract one, let's have another look at it actually there. So you see this dialogue. Hello, Tina. Very pleased to meet you. Pleased to meet you too. Would you like a cup of tea or water or anything like that? This is bullshit, okay? What it is redundant dialogue. It is not required in your fiction writing. So this is what I mean by your dialogue needs to carry plot forward, which is what it does in extract 2 if you look at that. So here we have, so you called me here to see if I would speak to the Russian president. I'm afraid you may be our only hope, Tina. Igor Stalanovich is intent on beginning a massive war. We have plot being carried forward. So the actual crux of the story is being discussed in the dialogue, which is exactly what I mean by dialogue must carry plot forward. And you'll see how I got through this. So let's have a look at that there again. See here it says, you know, her heart rate was racing even more at the end of the first sentence, and then but her nervousness didn't last very long. Within 5 minutes of meeting the Prime Minister, Tina got straight down to business. So that's how I actually bridged the niceties. I didn't have Tina meeting the Prime Minister for the first time and, you know, hello, pleased to meet you. Would you like a cup of tea or a water or anything like that? I got rid of the niceties. I got rid of the redundant dialogue of Tina meeting the Prime Minister for the first time. Because if I have in my consciousness as an author that my dialogue must carry plot forward, well then I will find a way to get rid of this redundant dialogue that is never needed in my writing. So remember, please remember, rule number 1 when it comes to dialogue is that dialogue 90% of the time, unless you're giving insight into character personality, 90% of the time your dialogue should be carrying plot forward. And on top of that, I just want to add that dialogue, even though I'm saying should always carry plot forward, it should never be used to sum up plot, because that's seen as real amateur writing, okay? So if you have a character at the end of your story just sprouting out dialogue that sums up and ties up the whole plot, that's not good enough. So for example, if you have written something like this to tie up your crime thriller novel, the reason I murdered those 7 people is because I hate people who seem to have everything handed to them on a plate. These snobby people who have big cars, big houses, big bank accounts. That's not good enough, okay? That is telling through dialogue. So you're summing up your story by allowing your character to just explain through his dialogue what was going on through the whole story arc. That's not good enough, okay? So although I'm saying you should carry plot forward, you should not sum up plot by just allowing your character to spew out everything that had been going on. That's seen as telling through dialogue and is not seen as good writing. The justification for your character's actions, why he killed those people, should be interweaved throughout your whole narrative, through show, not tell. So just telling through dialogue at the end screams amateur manuscript, and you're not likely, in fact you won't, get a publishing deal if that's your approach to it. So although I'm saying carry plot forward is the strictest rule when it comes to dialogue, summing up your whole plot through dialogue at the end is a big no-no. So that is rule number 1. Rule number 2 that I would like you to take away from this video is each character should have his or her own unique voice. Now the problem with this is an awful lot of amateur manuscripts or student manuscripts that I see on a regular basis, all of the characters sound the same, or their dialogue has the same voice to it, and that's a no-no as well, okay? So I mean, I'm a big fan of Aaron Sorkin, who is this great dialogue writer who writes for TV, not this discipline you want to write in, which is novels, but I'm such a big fan that I've taken one of his courses when it comes to dialogue, and he said when it comes to dialogue, his first rule is that nobody ever starts a sentence with "damn it," but yet we see that in bad fiction writing all the time, that people talk like "damn it," and then they get on with their dialogue as if they're in a 1950s detective TV series. So you need to be very conscious of how each of your characters would talk and what way they would talk. So I'll just give you some examples of how you can improve that. So I'll start by detailing a mistake that I made when I wrote my first novel. One of my characters was called Dara, and he was from the west of Ireland, but he had a real dark background. He didn't really have much. His parents had split and they didn't really care too much for him, so he came from a dark place. So when I was writing his dialogue for the first time, and I wanted to give him a unique voice because that's what Aaron Sorkin said I should do when I took his course, this is how I wrote Dara's dialogue. "Yeah, I don't want to be doing shit like that me whole life." Now I thought this was good when I was first doing it because I'd learned all about how to give your characters uniqueness in their voice and they should be different to everybody else. But I went way over the top with this, okay? It doesn't have to be that phonetic. By the time I learned how to rein it back in, but still keeping Dara's unique voice, what happened in the story was the dialogue turned out like this. "Here, I don't want to be doing shit like that me whole life." Now, it sort of sounds the same when I read it out, but because the first option was so phonetic and that I literally spelled things out like they should have been said, I'm losing readers there, because people are going to pick that up who don't know the dialect of West of Ireland and think, what the fuck is this character saying? Okay, so although you want to give your characters a unique voice, you also want to be subtle with it, okay? So rather than the real phonetic approach that I did when I wasn't sure exactly what I was doing, I will give him a unique voice, but do it really subtly. Okay, so you can see actually in the examples that I did earlier on about Tina Gates meeting the Prime Minister for the first time. The Prime Minister was saying sentences like, "I'm afraid you may be our only hope, Tina." It's just clear and concise that you would imagine somebody at the top of British politics would sound like, although given the people that are at the top of fucking British politics at the moment, maybe they wouldn't be concise. But that's me going on a political rant that I will say for another video in another realm. But that's how the Prime Minister might talk. Whereas Tina's dialogue was a bit like this. "But why do you think I can convince him to change his mind?" Now it's just very, very subtle. You can see there the third word is a bridged word between two words, "do," rather than "do you." She wouldn't be that precise being a young girl, so she would say "do you," and that's exactly what I mean by giving a character unique voice. It can be that subtle. If the Prime Minister would have said that a different way, she would have pronounced the "do you." Tina, being a young girl, would have pronounced it "do you." Okay? And that is what I mean. It's very, very subtle when you're giving unique voice. But I'm going to give you some methods that I use to help you give your characters unique voice. In my very first draft of writing, I don't really care too much about the preciseness of voice when I'm writing dialogue. I just want to get through my first draft of my novel, type the end, and then go, phew, pop open a bottle of wine, relax. First draft is down. In the second draft, I go through technicalities and try and fix up where my spelling and punctuation might have gone awry. And then in my third draft, it's characterization. So what I'm doing is I'm trying to make my characters become more believable, more three-dimensional in a way, and make sure their dialogue has that unique voice. So this is what I do, and it doesn't take that long, and I hope it doesn't sound as pretentious as it may sound. But I go inside my characters' heads by listening to music. So for example, Tina, who is a young girl, I might listen to some One Direction. I would imagine she might be a fan of One Direction. So I go around with my headphones, listening to One Direction. I try and get into Tina's head. Then I go through my manuscript, thinking that I have an idea of how this girl would speak or her psyche in some way from listening to fucking Harry Styles and Louis Tomlinson and the boys. And then I would write her dialogue as I am in her head. And then I might go back and rewrite all of the Prime Minister's dialogue, and I might listen to some classical music because I assume that's what my Prime Minister, Penny Smith, would listen to. So here I am with Beethoven or Mozart in my ears for an hour or so, and then I go through the dialogue that Penny Smith, my Prime Minister, might write, and I write in her voice. So I know that sounds a little bit pretentious, but those small nuanced approaches do actually work, because remember, you're trying to give your character a unique voice, and any help or any benefit that you can gain from pretentious things like listening to music to find your character will make your character become more alive, okay? It will help your character pop. So a less pretentious way of making your character's dialogue pop or become unique is to read it out loud. So this is another approach I take. In my third draft, I do the music approach, pretentious as it is, and then I do another approach which is reading it out loud, and it's very, very simple. So I would read all of my dialogue out loud and make sure it sounds realistic and not just made up drivel, the first thing I could think of I typed down type of dialogue, which I see in an awful lot of my students and amateur manuscripts. So given all that pretentiousness and all, essentially what I've tried to teach you in this lesson is two key areas of dialogue, and they are: one, your dialogue should always carry plot forward, and two, each character should have unique voice when it comes to dialogue. So I hope in this short video I have in some way given you some hints and tips on how you can improve your dialogue. Please do check out the website theopenauthor.com, where you can see an array of these videos, which I hope will help you really finish that first novel. That's the idea of me recording these videos, is to help people like you finally write that debut book. Aside from that, if you do want help, do go to Facebook and join the group Future Author Society, because what we have in there is a range of people just like you who are attempting to write their first novel, and we're each supporting ourselves or yourselves through that process. And I pop in there on the daily to give help and tips and to answer some questions that people might pose in the group. Other than that, I would love it if you subscribe to the videos or even comment below. Until then, goodbye.